What's up, Baylor family? It's Tuesday, August 20th. Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Colt Barber here with Grayson, Grundhoefer, and on today's show, we're going to talk about the edge position, also formerly known as the jack position. Is essentially the outside linebackers who have a unique DNA and hypothetically should do everything from rush the passer, stop the run, and play in coverage to an extent. Grayson, for me, this might be the most intriguing group of the entire defense. I don't know if your opinion stacks up with that, but you look at the guys who played this position, unique DNA. I mean, you're talking about big guys who can run, rush the passer, stop the run, kind of do everything that you would want in the front seven, but they're built a little bit different than other guys around them. In terms of what Baylor has at this position, you have a lot of seniors, a lot of potential production coming in as transfers. They were here. Garmin Randolph was here last year for multiple years as a super senior. Overall, what are your thoughts on this group?
I think this is one of the most intriguing groups on the roster for sure. I mean, you look at kind of the different body types that they have, the different levels of production that they have. I think a lot of it is really intriguing. I mean, when you talk about freaky athletes, that's kind of what you're looking for at this position. I think they have that now. And I think this was an area that the staff really need to address in the transfer portal coming into the offseason. And they were really able to do that with two very key additions that we're going to talk about to mix in with Garmin Randolph, who's played at Baylor a ton, and Kyler Jordan, who also played some the past couple years as well. So a very intriguing group, and a group that I do view as one that has a very high upside.
Yeah, so let's start with Garmin. As a guy going into his super senior year, basically decided to stay for another year, was actually recruited by Matt Rule's staff. It was a potential tight end prospect in high school. I would say he's had a solid career, but hasn't had that one season where he's just blown up and kind of met his full potential. But Dave Aranda had an interesting quote after the scrimmage on Saturday where he said he's playing his best ball ever. Now you take that and knowing like, hey, there are in scrimmages, it's the off season, it's not in a true game, but I think it's an encouraging sign for someone like that, even if it's just kind of a little extra motivation for them to continue playing well. But if this is a guy that truly puts it all together, I mean, he's listed at 6'8", 260 pounds. So like the ability to play at that size in coverage, rush the passer, stop the run, like what you want this position to do at that size is pretty incredible. What are your expectations for a guy like this who has never really put it all together, but has had a pretty decent career at Baylor over the last few years?
The biggest thing really with Garmin, I think, is just his familiarity with the scheme. I think that's going to be key for him playing a lot this year. I think the next two guys, there's one that I view as having a higher upside, and then there's one that I view as being a more sure thing production-wise. And so where does Garmin fit in on that? It's the fact that he knows this defense. And because he knows this defense, he knows Dave Aranda's coaching style. Hopefully it all comes together for him, because remember, this is a little bit of a change defensively. If they're going to run with two edges at times, it's going to be more like a four-man front. I think that could be a good thing for Garmin potentially. If other guys along the defensive line can pass rush and get after the quarterback, might allow him to be in more one-on-one situations. Ultimately though, he's played a lot of football at Baylor, and he only has 7.5 sacks. That's just the reality of the situation. And so for me to have huge expectations for him, I think would be a little foolish, but I do think he is a guy that could come out, maybe have 5 sacks this year, but also be extremely, extremely reliable in the other things that he's going to be asked to do, dropping into coverage, stopping the run. Those things I think are where he'll really, really contribute. And you're just hoping that there's a little bit of upside left there as a pass rusher.
Yeah, with his size and length, I think in the run game specifically, his potential is very high. You don't want him to get washed out of plays because he's too light, but I think he's so long, and we've seen it in his career where he just kind of goes in and bear hugs running backs, quarterbacks, whatever, because he is so big. And I think if he can play with that, reference Ashley Hodge here, play with his wingspan and be wide and be big on the edge, that's kind of what Baylor can benefit from the most with him. If you get something in the pass rushing department, great. I think there will be opportunities for him to get there. But as you said, like, I don't think that's necessarily his strong suit. And if he is truly bigger and stronger, which I think that he is, at this stage of his career. He needs to just use that to the best of his ability. And I think leading into the other guys we're about to talk about, their strong suits are a little bit different than his. And that's what makes this room very intriguing for me. So let's start next on the list with Steve Linton, a senior transfer. He was at Syracuse. He went to Texas Tech. Last year at Texas Tech, when they played Baylor, he had 3 sacks in that game. So Baylor fans, if you don't remember his name, you probably remember that, just being thinking like, who is this guy blowing up our offensive line? And his potential has always been there. I mean, you're talking about a guy that as a high school senior, he was, I think, pretty good basketball player, but very athletic. He was always timed really high in the 40-yard dash, pretty low in the 40-yard dash. And now he's 6'5", 245 pounds or so. And it sounds like he is kind of that heat-seeking missile. And as a transfer, he comes in with not having fully put it together, but he does have that potential. And believe it or not, like, I feel like he's a guy who has kind of emerged. We hear about him pretty often, and not that we didn't expect him to, but it seems like he has a bigger role than what I even anticipated whenever he was signed.
I would agree with that. I think he's a guy that they brought in with the hopes that he could reach the athletic potential that he showed at Syracuse. I mean, if you remember, let's just rewind to last offseason. I mean, the Texas Tech staff was acting like this guy was going to go first round in the NFL draft. Right. And I remember that very vividly, that there was a lot of hype about what he was going to bring to the table. It just didn't really work out for him. He only played in 8 games at Texas Tech. He became very much you can only be on the field when you're pass rushing. That was basically the only times that he ended up being on the field towards the end of the year, which I feel like is disappointing for sure. But I think the biggest thing for me when I look at kind of his improvement at Texas Tech, despite the fact that there were some obstacles, he actually got better. Overall defense, he went from a 68 grade to a 73 grade. His pass rushing went from 77.4 to 87.1. And he had 15 quarterback hurries compared to 10, again, in just 8 games compared to 13 at Syracuse. So I think there's some untapped potential there. I think in maybe a different defensive scheme, a scheme that can utilize his strengths a little bit better, or maybe at least have the personnel to utilize those strengths better, I think he can be very impactful. And this is a guy that we've seen it. He can get after the quarterback. He's very athletic. You can move him around, whether it's in coverage or, against the run, sort of. That's not his strong suit. His strong suit is more he'll drop into coverage or he's going to pass rush. But I think in general, he's a very nice get for the staff. And this is the guy who I view as having the most upside as a pass rusher.
Yeah. So when you talk about Baylor's peso position, which would be playing 2 jacks, 2 edges, outside of 2 interior defensive linemen. So essentially a 4-man front, but both of these guys are standing up. It's more than likely going to be Garmin Randolph and Steve Linton. They both kind of bring different dynamics. But for me, where this benefits Linton the most is that you do have some unexpected, like, what are you actually going to do with both of these guys on the field? Because if Garmin can be strong enough against the run and good enough in coverage, I think that allows Steve Linton to really open up. And maybe you bring him from more of a second level pass rush, where before you're just lining them directly on the line of scrimmage and asking them to do one thing. So there's more surprise in what Dave Aranda wants to bring with him. And I think being able to plug in a guy like that, I don't know if they've had someone like him when you talk about his general DNA of his size plus his ability to rush the passer. I mean, we want Garmin to be that, but I think Steve with his size can be that, but he also has the ability to drop in coverage. I'm not expecting anything, crazy in coverage. He's not going to go out and cover slot receivers by any means, but matching him up with a tight end to cover a flat is not going to be an issue because of it. And so I think he's going to benefit most from playing opposite of someone who can do similar things, maybe not exactly the same, but similar things, as long as he can be sustained against the run. And you mentioned that as kind of his weakness and not necessarily a strong suit. If he can hold up against the run, he's going to find more and more time on the field.
He will. And I think that will be masked by the fact that you have Garmin Randolph, who I do think is good against the run. I think their defensive line will be good against the run, and I think their linebackers will be improved. You're not always going to have A+ guys at every, facet of football. Like that's just not going to happen. But with his athleticism, I do think that there is some upside for him to maybe take a little bit of a step forward against the run, or maybe be put in better positions when he is stopping the run, to where he's just dealing with one blocker instead of multiple. So I'm curious kind of how that works out. But I think in general, he's really going to be utilized as a pass rushing weapon, a guy that offenses are going to have to worry about. And I could see him having his best year of his career this season. And I really do think of the pass rushers that they have up front, I think he's the one that probably has the best chance at leading this team in sacks.
Follow Baylor Plus and Sick'em 365 today on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and sign up for the new premium content bundle. For the monthly price is $17.99, a $5 per month savings. Baylor fans can access the full offerings that both platforms offer: the long-form storytelling, video, and all access behind-the-scenes content of Baylor Plus, and the premium news, analysis, and forums of Sick'em 365. Sign up today on either platform.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. Catch Colt and I on Inside Baylor Sports every weekday. You can also watch the video version free over at BaylorPlus.com or the official Baylor Athletics YouTube channel.
Yeah, and you look at him specifically, I think of this entire group, I think he probably has the most explosive ability, which also obviously translates to rushing the passer. But I think to a great extent, it's also shows his potential against the run and creating disruptive plays against running backs and not just quarterbacks, which Baylor needs. I mean, that was something that they struggled with last year, was generating tackles for loss. Some of that goes back to the down linemen and the linebackers, but you need this position to be a disruptor. I don't know. I think Garmin's going to be a very solid situational. He's going to play, or sorry, not situational, but he's going to play every single down and do the things you need him to do. But who's going to be that disruptor? I think of this entire depth chart, Steve Linton is that guy, not just rushing the passer. I think he can do it against the run as well. He just has to go out and do it. Let's move to the next transfer, Joz Evans from Western Kentucky. Really interesting backstory with him is that he had a really solid, I guess it was his junior year in 2022, 11 plus tackles for loss, a lot of sacks, playing a similar position at Western Kentucky. Last year had injury issues, and I think if he wouldn't have had injury issues, he might have gone somewhere bigger than Baylor. And I say that in a very cautious type of way, but he was going to blow up if he would have produced the same way he did once again. But he had an injury issue. I think he's going to be identified as not necessarily as athletic or the physical specimen that Garmin and Steve Linton will be, but he's going to be more of a cerebral player who's going to understand what's going on. He's going to read his keys and he's going to go and make plays. And that's what he's kind of thrived off throughout his career. Now he's also dealing with an injury right now, so he hasn't been practicing, but he's a third element that I think if you're talking about rotating guys, I mean, if he's your third option and he's playing at the level he has shown in the past, it's a great problem to have.
It definitely is. And this is one of those situations where you really trust the evaluation, because Jamar Chaney, who is Baylor's linebacker coach now, was actually his outside linebacker coach at Western Kentucky. So you would think that if anyone was going to have intel about how good Joz Evans is, it would be Jamar Chaney. And so that gives me a lot of confidence that there is definitely a game plan to utilize him in a big way. And for him to come in and really fill a role that maybe these other guys don't necessarily fill. And I think that role, to be honest, is just being stable, having a safe floor, being a guy that does everything you need, very good all-around prospect. He's not the best athlete. He's not going to wow you with his speed or anything along those lines. But what he is going to do is he's going to consistently be in the backfield. He's going to be able to drop in coverage. He's going to hold up against the run. You mentioned his 2022 season. He was an All-Conference USA first teamer. He had 27 quarterback hurries that year to go along with 8.5 sacks and then 106 tackles. He played a lot of meaningful snaps and was really, really good. You mentioned this past season dealt with injuries, but had he not gotten hurt, he was actually on pace to have a very similar year to the year that he had in 2022. And so that gives me a lot of hope that this is a guy that just figured it out during his time at Western Kentucky. He's a guy that just knows how to play the game, knows his role. And if he is healthy, I think he will be productive and play a lot. And if you have three guys of this caliber, It's going to be really difficult, I think, for offenses to kind of game plan for that because they're all so different.
Yeah. And I would say of Dave Aranda Sr. at Baylor, I know that Steve and Jaquez have not been on campus producing at Baylor, but I think you look top to bottom for this particular edge position. I don't think it's been better. And it starts with Garmin obviously being there for multiple years, several years. But both of these guys are any other year could have potentially been Baylor's starter at that position. And so I think that gives you a lot of confidence. And that allows me to talk about Kyler Jordan, who probably played a larger role than he should have last year. And nothing against him. He's just young. He was a redshirt freshman last year. Now he's a redshirt sophomore. I think he's going to be more of the Joz Evans type of player rather than Garmin and Steve Linton when it's all said and done. I think he's going to be able to produce ultimately, but not for the same reasons as Garmin and Steve are capable of doing. So talk a little bit about him. He was, I don't know if his ultimate position would have been this edge position whenever he was brought in, but that's where he is now. And I think he has the capabilities of playing there.
He does. And he's actually a true interior linebacker that plays edge. It's really interesting because he really like his frame and the way he
built
plays.
Like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. He's built more like an inside linebacker. And so, maybe at some point he does play that. I don't know. But and especially when you look at the way Baylor's recruiting this position, it seems to be going away from that body type. But Kyler's a good football player. And that's what's been the reoccurring theme with him during his time at Baylor is just the simple fact that he produces, he plays really hard, he's there every single day, he provides leadership, he provides stability. And that's been a constant with him since the moment he got to Baylor. He just is outworking people, and that's what he's done. And so having a guy like that be in your two deep, having a guy like that be able that you can rely on if things don't work out for whatever reason, or if you need more of a guy to drop into coverage, if you need a guy to stop the run a little bit better, I think Kyler Jordan can really fill that role nicely. He gives them nice depth and a great insurance policy in case something doesn't work out, if an injury happens, if Steve Linton doesn't produce, those are the type of things where you need a guy like Kyler who's going to provide a lot of stability to the room. And he's just a really good football player.
Yeah. And overall, I know I just mentioned a minute ago, but the depth there is encouraging. I think there's potential for more production than what we've seen from any of these guys in their career. And I think a lot of what Dave Aranda wants, like how highly discussed was this position when Dave Aranda arrived. I mean, you look back through his career, everywhere he had guys who produce at high levels there. But I think this position is kind of built around a good linebacker core and a good interior defensive line, because without those things, these guys are kind of isolated. You want to put them in one-on-one matchups more often than not. But if your interior line and your linebackers aren't doing their job, they're not going to be in isolated positions and to go and make plays. And so when we talk about the high-end potential for this group, the other people around them, and I think Dave Aranda mentioned this in his press conference or his media session on Saturday, the entire defense needs to play as one. And I think that's what this stems back to. And if there's a strength of this defense, that is what it is. And that's encouraging to me. If this unit is truly playing as one, that means that the interior line are doing their job, the linebackers are doing their job, which allows this high-end potential position to do their job and what they're best at, and that just create chaos. And we really haven't seen that. I mean, even in the 2021 season, with Garmin was there, Matt Jones was there playing that position before he moved to the middle linebacker position. But even then they weren't producing at a crazy level. I think there was a little bit of a disruptive nature, but we haven't seen the production that this position is capable of. And I think that I don't know if Dave Aranda will be able to pull that out as the defensive coordinator more than maybe Ron Roberts was a couple of years ago or Matt Pallage was. But I have a feeling that he will scheme up this position a little more than we have seen. He's an innovator, and I think that we have not seen it used to its full effect until this point.
I would agree with that. I would also just be sure to mention that even when Dave Randis coached a lot of defenses, a lot of varying positions, and typically his defensive line don't have a bunch of sack numbers. That's just not really the way that they focus their defense. It's more stopping the run, taking up blockers so that then the linebackers and secondary level guys can come with the blitzes. And then that's kind of how it's really been with Dave Aranda. Even during the 2021 season, it was Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie were just living in the backfield, it felt like, as blitzers. And so that's one thing that I think is important to mention. But I do think you're exactly right, though, of all the groups that he's had at Baylor, this is the deepest, and this is the highest potential for them to get pressure on the quarterback from these edge spots, especially if you play two of them at a time. That's huge. And that could be an area that takes this defense to another level. I think they have the talent to do it. I like the talent in this room. It's just a matter of, can it all come together for these guys individually, whether it's Garmin Randolph living up to his potential, Steve Linton putting it all together, being consistent for a season, or Joz Evans just being healthy. If those things come together, they could really, really take this defense to another level.
Yeah. And I think we put this all in perspective of where this group was last year. There's a lot of new faces. So at every level of the defense, there's a lot of new faces. We mentioned it in this edge position group. There's so many unknowns that we want to talk about the potential and what they could be. But it's also just a matter of being at your core and being the best that you can be to help the team reach the postseason again, right? Like, you want to shoot for a Big 12 championship, but you have to look at these guys in perspective of what are they going to do better than we did last year. And I think this group particularly has that. They have that potential. We just don't know. We haven't seen it all put together yet. The staff has seen that in practices. We know that guys like Steve Linton are extremely athletic with high-end potential, but this staff's job is to get it out of them. And I'm excited to see, because we know that what Dave Aranda can do with talented personnel, and now he's over this defense. So what can he get out of Steve Linton? I'm stoked to see it. It doesn't mean there's any guarantees that come with it, but there is a lot of potential in that room. And athletically, and I'll go back to it, I don't think that we've seen anything like it. So any final thoughts on this group as we move in throughout these other positions over the rest of this week?
I just want to mention one quick stat that I think is really important and is a big reason why they addressed the jack position so heavily this offseason. Baylor finished with a whopping 18 sacks in 12 games during the 2023 season. That was 113th out of 130 teams in the country. That was terrible. And that was a huge reason that they were very bad in many areas, because the secondary is not going to be able to hold up if you aren't getting pressure on the quarterback. I know there was an interesting stat. I don't remember exactly what it was, but Baylor also was near the top in the country at not being able to come up with sacks when they were in positions to make sacks. They were unable to come up with it. TJ Franklin is probably the one that was the most glaring at that this past season. And when you aren't able to come up with those sacks and then the quarterback gets outside the pocket, they can really make you pay. And so that's just a key reason that Baylor really went out, focused on this position, and really tried to upgrade it. And so if they can upgrade that, I think it will upgrade the entire defense as a whole and really help the secondary especially.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about another group tomorrow in the linebackers who has a new face, in Keaton Thomas. And you talk about disruptors and the potential of bringing those guys in. Keaton Thomas is one of those. And rushing the passer, stopping the run, he is going to be that. And it was an emphasis throughout every single level of the defense to bring in guys who could make plays. And I think it started with the interior defensive line, which we've discussed. I think it started with this particular edge position, and it goes all the way up to the safety positions. We're going to talk about all of those this week, how they brought in guys to be disruptive after not being disruptive at all last year in the front seven. So we're excited to do it. And we really appreciate all of you for tuning into Inside Baylor Sports, a Baylor Plus podcast. Grayson and I need you to help us share this podcast with all of your family and friends, wherever you get your podcast, tune in there, but also send the links to them. Make sure they're hearing this, make sure they're getting the information that they need to be prepared to talk Baylor football. We will talk to you tomorrow, and Sick 'em Bears.